Welcome to part 4 of our 8-part video series for the MicroFocus iPrint Appliance 2.0. My name is Bob Johnson with MicroFocus Technical Support, and in this video we are going to go through the import user process. The purpose for importing users is to allow your mobile users the ability to authenticate to the iPrint appliance. It is also used for authenticating to a secure printer. It is used for our new feature called walk-up printing, and it is also used for iPrint client management. If you are not using any of these features in the iPrint Appliance 2.0, you do not need to import users. To import users, we need to open the management console for the appliance. Open a web browser and go to https:// the DNS name or IP address of your appliance, :9443. In the management console, we always log in as VA admin. And once in the management console, click on Manage iPrint Appliance and click on Import Users. On the Import User screen, we're going to add a new LDAP source. Click on that link. Click OK. And for our example, we're going to be importing users from an OES server hosting eDirectory. The first step is to specify the LDAP server URL. In this field, we have two options. We can specify LDAP, which will go over port 389, or we can specify LDAP-S to go over the secure port 636. If we use LDAP-S, it is required to import a certificate from the server hosting your directory. In our example, we'll actually go over both options so that you can see what is involved when importing users using LDAP-S. For our first example, we will import users going over the non-secure port. So we specify LDAP : / the DNS name or IP address of your server hosting the directory. Because we're using 389, we do not need a user DN or password. And since we are using eDirectory, we specify GUID. We will leave the LDAP attribute used for iPrint name as UID. For the base DN, depending on your directory structure, you'll specify where you want the LDAP import to go out and pull the users from. In my case, my users reside here in the users Novell OU. Everything else can be left at the default. At this point, we can enable a schedule if we would like. This would allow the LDAP import to run on the schedule that you specify. For our test, we will simply choose Run Immediately and Save Changes. When we click on Save Changes, it will execute the import as specified. And here you can see it's gone out to the LDAP server and it has found the 5 users that I have in my users container. We click Close. By default, there is a cron job created to synchronize what we have just imported into the eDirectory on the appliance. And this job runs every 8 minutes. To check whether or not these users have been imported, we need to go into iManager for the appliance. To access iManager, open a web browser and go to the DNS name or IP address of your appliance /NPS. You'll log in as admin. And then to check to see whether or not the users have actually imported, click on Directory Administration, Modify Object, click on the magnifying glass, And normally what we would expect to see under the iPrint appliance is an O called Novell. Just a quick note before we proceed, the organizational unit typically will not be Novell, as this is directly dependent on your source LDAP structure. In my case, since the users are in the users.novell context, we expect to see a Novell organization with a user's organizational unit imported into the E directory of the appliance. What is seen here will be dependent on your specific environment. And then under Novell, we would see an OU called users. Because that doesn't exist, we know that the cron job has not yet run, and therefore our users have not been imported into E directory on the appliance. One thing you can do is you can open a PuTTY session to the appliance, and you can cat the etc cron tab file, and in this file you'll see the actual script that is run to synchronize the import to E directory, which is this script right here. If you highlight this script and right click, it will force the synchronization to run. And at that point, if we were to come back and choose modify object, click on the magnifying glass, we now see the Novell O, the user OU, and the 5 users that were imported during the user import process. Now that we verified that our users have imported successfully using the user import over the non-secure port 389, let's go through the steps needed to import users using LDAP-S over the secure port 636. To do that, we're back in the management console. We change LDAP to LDAP-S. And as mentioned, in order for this import to work successfully, we have to import a certificate from the server hosting the LDAP directory. If we were to run this as is, we're going to get this particular failure, and it indicates that we do not have a trusted certificate. So we click OK, close. One of the nice features of the management console is if we're not sure the process of importing a certificate, we can click on this help icon and it'll give us some very specific information about the LDAP import, including what is required to import a certificate. So if we're down in this section called Securing LDAP Synchronization, it tells us exactly what we need to do, exporting a root certificate and then importing the certificate into the Java key store. And it has steps for both E directory and Active Directory. And in this case, we are using E directory, so we'll click on this link. And then it tells us what to do on the server hosting the directory. So we'll just go through these steps. Step 1 is to launch iManager for the tree that hosts the LDAP directory, which I've done here. Then we click on Directory Administration, click on Modify Object, and browse to the tree name CA. This should be in the security container, and here we'll see Bob's OES 2015 tree CA. I select it, I click OK. Then it says click on the Certificates tab. Select the box for the root certificate, which is this option here. Click Validate. Comes back as valid. Select the box for the root certificate and click Export. Deselect Export Private Key. We need to drop down this list and choose this certificate for your tree. The export format remains DER. We click Next, and then we save the exported certificate. cert.dir, by default it'll be saved in the downloads directory. Click Close and OK. And then the next step is to import the root certificate into the Java key store on the appliance. And that is done back in the management console. And referring back to the documentation, here are the steps for importing the root certificate. Click on the Home button, and then we'll click on Digital Certificates. It says in the key store, make sure JVM Certificates is selected. Click File, Import Trusted Certificate. Browse to the directory where the certificate was downloaded, select it, click Open. You can leave the alias at the default and click OK. And then we get the message, please restart server for certificate changes to take effect, which is required. To restart the appliance, click Home and click Reboot. You can monitor the reboot process through the vSphere client if you'd like, or you can simply attempt to connect to the management console in the web browser until you're able to make a connection. Once the appliance has restarted, it may take a minute or two for some of the services to come up completely, but you should be able to go back to the management console again, log in as VA admin, and then we'll go back to our import users. Because we've just restarted the appliance, the import user screen can take a little bit longer to come up this time. And once the import user screen comes back up, we'll try our test. It saved the last attempt, LDAP-S, and our username and password. Everything else can be left at the default. You can click Run Immediately, click Save Changes. And then this error actually is a common error because I failed to specify the appropriate DN for admin. So in this field, it needs to be CN equals admin, comma, O equals Novell in my case. This is where your admin in the source E directory tree resides. Once that has been corrected, I should be able to click Run Immediately, Save Changes. And here you'll see the status is completed. Now, one thing I did to show how the LDAP synchronization works is I actually added a new user in my production tree called user 6. The LDAP import keeps track of users that have been imported. So you'll notice in this case, it simply added the new user. It didn't need to add the other 5 users because it already knew they had been synchronized to the appliance. Click Close. Now if we were to go back into iManager for the appliance, click Directory Administration, Modify Object. There's our Novell. There's our users. Notice we only have the 5 users. So if we go back to our PuTTY session, because we ran the Python script earlier, we should be able to press the up arrow key, and there it is. Press Enter. That will resync the users to E directory. And now if we were to go look, we have our new user 6 added to the directory. Now that our users have been imported, it is important to note that the users imported into the eDirectory of the iPrint appliance do not have passwords. The LDAP authentication that takes place during the authentication process is accomplished by the appliance redirecting the authentication request to the source LDAP server using the settings provided when configuring the LDAP source in the import user screen. This requires the LDAP source server to be running at all times if you expect the authentication request to succeed. This concludes part 4 of our 8-part video series. In part 5, we will install and configure a remote renderer. Thank you for watching.